You were wrong about World War One fighter aircraft. Why were they up there in the first place? Well, surely it's because they're sending over fighters over our side. We've got to combat them, shoot them down. They've got the Baron von Richthofen, Manfred von Richthofen from Breslau, shot down 80 aircraft. You know, we've got Mick Mannock, we've got Albert Bohr, we've got James McCudden. We have our ones. Even the French do. Obviously, the founder almost of the Ace, Roland Garros, who isn't a tennis court, he apparently was the first one to shoot straight through the propeller because he put some deflector plates on his propeller so he can mount a forward-firing machine gun and shoot through the spinner. Of course, the Germans... Well, actually, it wasn't the Germans. Albert Fokker, Dutchman, who was the first person to make a synchronizing gear, or an interrupter gear, more correctly called. So your machine gun, when the propeller blade is going to be in the direction of the gun, it will stop that shot, so it won't fire on that particular shot. An interrupter gear, and that was a great innovation. In 1916, it enabled, you know, the Fokker Scourge, as it was called, and Bloody April, and all these sorts of things, you know, these innovations by the Germans. But why the hell are they coming over? Why are we going over there? Why are we shooting down one another? I mean, why bother? Why are we combating them in the air at all? Surely it's because we want to up our score, you know? We want to get our cricket score up really, really high. We want to get a really high score. We want to shoot down as many Germans as we can, naturally. No, we're totally wrong there. And for a long time I had this misconception as well. I thought it was some kind of point-scoring competition. You know, I shot down 10 Germans, you know, you shot down 5. You know, well done. Pat on the back. No, nothing to do with that. The reason why that we were going over their lines in World War One, okay, the entire reason that's always missed is observation of artillery. The reason why we were sending planes over, okay, we were sending over two-seater planes, all right, like Fe-2Ds, things like this, even early Avro aircraft. The reason why was because we would be observing the shell fire. Because you can imagine that you've got the artillery firing well off in the distance. They didn't at that point, sort of early 1914, have sophisticated listening equipment so they could detect the exact place where the shell has fallen. Later on we did have that. I presume the Germans did as well, if we have listening equipment to detect where the shell lands. So it was very important to be able to observe where the shells fell. So the artillery fire, these things can fire, you know, several miles. You know, a large gun, a 15-inch gun, can fire all the way across, you know, Greater London. You know, it's 20-odd miles. You know, we're talking about long ranges for the howitzers that were mounted at the back. Albeit that we didn't really have any of those at the start of the war with the British Auxiliary Force. But we soon delivered those, and the Germans had them. Long-range howitzers. We're talking about many miles firing. Where do they land? How do you correct your fire? How do you make sure it's landing on the trench, the secondary trench, the tertiary trench? How do you know where they're landing? The way in which you know in which way they're landing is you have an observer plane up. And the way we used to do it, the British... we would send up a plane and they would literally have, it would be like a clock face, and they would describe it. You know, if you're a dot on, it's 12. If you're a bit to the right, it's 1 o'clock. If you're too short, it's 6 o'clock. I'm not quite sure how that worked in a 3D environment, but anyway, apparently that's how they did it. They had a clock face that they used to use. Description. They didn't have radio. This was the problem. The planes were not powerful enough initially to carry radios, so they had to use a series of flags and things like this. And this is why those artillery spotters were two-seaters. You had one dude piloting the plane, and then you had another dude as the observer. And indeed, that was how Richthofen got his first taste of the air. He was initially a cavalry officer. He fought in the Schlieffen Plan. He went into France in a big right hook. He fought there. I believe quite a few of his troop was wiped out, actually, because he did something dumb. He sort of wandered out on his horses and right into a machine gun. He fought a little bit on the Eastern Front, and then, I believe it's 1916, he came back to the West, by this time saying, nah, cavalry's dead, I want to be in the air. And of course, he was a masterful shot. But while he was an observer, he did have a crack at a few of the enemy, I believe on the Eastern Front. And he used to carry a rifle with him up in the air, did Manfred von Richthofen. And so he did see some enemy aircraft, and he was there popping at them with his rifle. Didn't hit anything. Well, he may have done, but it didn't take them out either way. It's very hard to take out someone with 1 or 2 rifle bullets unless you get a shot, in the pilot or into the engine or into the gas tank, But yeah, the point of this video is that we always forget we laud the aces. We have these big monuments to people like Bull and Manock and, over in Germany, Richthofen. People like this. He's been buried 3 times, I believe, Richthofen, just as a matter of interest. He's getting reburied by different people wanting to claim him because he was such a great pilot. And of course, Venevos, Hermann Goering, there are many, and obviously we have the Bolker Dictator, don't we, which is still, I believe, taught to pilots today, fighter pilots, Oswald Bolker, who tragically was killed in a collision with his wingman. An enemy aircraft, British aircraft, flew across in front of them, and they both, him and his wingman, both swerved, and their wings touched, and just a touch when you're flying at 100 mile an hour is enough to disintegrate your wing, and his lower wing came off, and he went down, and he crashed, Oswald Bolker, and he was killed in the crash, not wearing his seatbelt. Had he been, he might have survived. But I'm digressing. The point was, it was the artillery observation. That was the thing. That was the purpose of being in the air. It was primarily for that, for directing the artillery. And that was what was causing the casualties. Yes, the casualties in the Royal Flying Corps and later the Royal Air Force were terrible. If you look at them as a percentage, your chance of surviving was very low. But if you look at them compared with the troops on the ground, in actual fact, the casualties were minimal, because you could get a whole battalion wiped out easily in one action, 1,000 men. Yeah? First day of the Somme, 60,000 casualties, 20,000 British dead on the 1st July 1916. And we don't even mention the French. They were there in just as many numbers and suffered tremendous casualties, but they were better at that stage, so they didn't suffer as many dead as the British did. But again, that's a digression. It was the aiming of the artillery. That was the purpose of flying in the air. And what was the purpose of the scouts, or the pursuit aircraft, as the Americans call them, the fighter planes, as we call them? It was to protect the artillery observers. Was bombing important at that stage? No, not really. People had a little go at it. It was just in its infancy, really. Obviously, we had the Gotha raids on England. We had the Zeppelin raids, which did cause tremendous panic and tremendous anger, because one of the first bombs actually fell on a school, killed many, many children, which was a terrible thing. And these were daylight raids. You can get high enough to even intercept them, and all that stuff. So bombing was there. It was a nuisance, caused a little bit of damage, but no, that was not what it was all about. The bombing was really just a little tickling. It was all about the artillery observation, and also, as had been discovered before the war, the initial use, I think the reason why they were first incorporated, certainly into the British Army as the Royal Flying Corps, was that you could detect the enemy on their manoeuvres. So you could see on the ground, you could observe the ground far, far in the front. So it's basically doing the role of cavalry. It was a scouting mission, and that's why they were called scouts. So you could see what the enemy were doing when the war was mobile. But come World War I, it was the artillery observation that was the key. So let's not get too hung up on these aces and their tremendous kills. Yes, they were amazing aviators, some of them. But it really was those pilots, those brave pilots in those big, clumsy, slow, sitting duck aircraft, really, these observation airplanes that were spotting the artillery. Those were the ones that were directing the killing. Those are the ones that eventually, come the 100 days, actually won the war in a great victory for the Allies. Okay, thanks for listening.